Hi, my name's Maris. I thought I'd inherited my grandfather's house after he passed away. At least that's what I was told, what he told me. But while I was grieving, still waking up thinking I'd hear his old slippers sliding across the floor, my own parents sold the house right out from under me, behind my back. They forged my signature, moved in my cousin, told me I was too emotional to handle real responsibility. But Grandpa had known them better than I ever did. He left something behind they didn't see, something hidden in the walls. By the time they realized what they'd missed, it was already too late. But let me back up. What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories reach. I pulled up slowly, the gravel crunching under my tires, the early evening sun casting long shadows across the porch, the same porch Grandpa used to wave from every time I came home. For a moment, it felt like he might still come out, arms wide, that gentle smile on his face, and say, "Well, there's my girl." But he wouldn't, not anymore. He was gone, and all I had left, so I thought, was the house. I stepped out of the car and headed toward the mailbox, just like I always did when I visited. But something was off. The brass nameplate on the front. It didn't say Blythe anymore. It had been changed. A new name caught the light. Zenaya Langford. My stomach turned. Zenaya, my cousin. The same Zenaya who used to fake allergies to get out of helping Grandpa rake the leaves, who never came unless there was food or gifts involved. I opened the mailbox, half hoping for a letter addressed to me. Maybe something from a lawyer confirming what Grandpa had promised all those years, that the house would be mine. Instead, there was a dog food coupon and a realtor flyer. Her face was on it, Zenaya's, grinning wide like she owned the place. I carried my bag toward the front door, slipping my hand under the ceramic frog that still sat beside the steps. The spare key was still there. At least that hadn't changed. Inside, though, everything had. The smell hit me first. Lavender, lemon oil, something sterile like a hotel cleaner trying to erase any memory of the people who used to live there. I stepped into the living room and blinked back the sting in my eyes. Boxes, neatly labeled, stacked high along the walls. Living room decor. ZL books. Grandpa Miska, donate. I turned slowly. The grandfather clock still ticked in the corner, but the warmth in the room was gone, like someone had gutted it and painted over the absence. One box caught my eye. Maris, childhood room, sort later. The handwriting was rushed, almost careless, like my entire childhood could be packed away and filed under afterthought. I walked down the hallway, passing the coat rack where Grandpa used to hang my little red umbrella every time I forgot it. My bedroom door was open. Empty. The closet held just 2 boxes, both labeled, Miss, Dispose, or Donate. I sat down on the edge of my old bed, but even the mattress had been replaced. The indent I used to curl into as a kid was gone. I pressed my palms to my thighs and tried to breathe through the ache rising in my throat. Grief, I'd been told, came in waves. But this felt like a wrecking ball. I stood again, wobbling just slightly, and made my way toward the study. My fingers grazed the walls as I walked, grounding myself in what little remained familiar. Then I heard it. "Oh, Maris, you're early." I turned. My mother stood in the hallway, perfectly done up, lipstick unsmudged, heels tapping against hardwood like she was heading to brunch, not walking through the house of the man we'd buried just days ago. "Early for what?" I asked quietly. She gave me that tight-lipped smile, the one she always used before saying something awful wrapped in honey. "Zenaya's been staying here to help with the transition," she said breezily. "We're getting things ready to list." "List what?" "The house, sweetheart. You know how old it is. The upkeep alone would drown you." She walked past me, casually adjusting a crooked picture frame on the wall, like she hadn't just punched a hole through my world. I thought I started, but my voice faltered. Grandpa said, "He told me this house would be mine." She shrugged. "Well, plans change, and you know your grandfather was never great with paperwork." I didn't reply. I just kept walking. The study was darker than I remembered. The curtains had been changed, probably something trendy and beige, Zenaya's taste, not Grandpa's. I walked over to his desk. The smell of cedar and ink still lingered faintly. I opened drawer after drawer, careful not to disturb anything, though most of it already had been. Nothing unusual. Until the last drawer. The one on the far right. It was locked. I paused, fingers tracing the wood grain. Below the keyhole, almost invisible unless you knew where to look, were 3 tiny carved letters. M.A.B. My initials. No one else's. I rested my palm flat against the drawer. "You promised," I whispered. "You said this would be mine." The sunlight outside had shifted into a dull orange by now, casting long shadows across the carpet. I didn't move. I just stood there, hands still resting on the drawer like it could answer me. Then the front door creaked open again. Voices, laughter, the crinkle of grocery bags, the click of heels. I snapped out of it. I slipped the envelope I'd found nearby into my jacket pocket, closed the drawer gently, and stepped back into the hallway. The living room, so silent just an hour ago, was now filled with noise and people. Zinea was perched on the arm of the couch in a designer tracksuit, grinning like she was on a reality show. My father, Griffin, leaned casually against the fireplace, arms crossed, wearing his usual expression of tired diplomacy. And Vera, my mother, was gliding around the room like a hostess at a gala. "We were wondering where you went," she said, her voice too bright. "I told them you were probably just reminiscing." I didn't answer. Instead, my eyes dropped to the coffee table where a thick folder now sat, and I suddenly understood they were rewriting the story, and they didn't plan to include me in it. I didn't sit. I didn't speak. I just stared at the folder on the table like it might sprout teeth and bite me. "Everyone's here," Zinea chirped, twirling a strand of hair around her finger, like this was a family brunch, and not my grandfather's house being dissected and sold off like a yard sale. Griffin cleared his throat, always the one to try smoothing over jagged moments. "We wanted to loop you in properly, Maris. I know this has moved quickly, but it's really for the best." "For the best," I repeated softly, like I was trying the words on for size. Vera clasped her hands in that serene way she did when she wanted something to feel righteous. "The house went into escrow last Friday. It's a solid offer, above market. Closing should happen in about 10 days, give or take." My knees buckled a little, but I forced myself to stay upright. "You sold it?" Griffin gave me that look, the one he used when I was 12 and he had to explain the IRS to me. "It was too much for you, sweetheart. The maintenance alone, not to mention the property taxes. You're a librarian. How would you even begin to keep up?" Zinea laughed, light and airy like she was humoring a child. "You should be thanking us, cousin. I mean, no stress, no mortgage, no roof leaks. You dodged a bullet." The air in the room shifted. Cold, intentional. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't miscommunication. This was a decision they'd made without me, about me, and were now trying to decorate with smiles. Vera picked up the folder and walked over like she was presenting a gift. "This is just the acknowledgement paperwork. The buyer's doing a final walkthrough tomorrow." I took the folder slowly, opened it. It was all there. Escrow details, closing timeline, signatures. But not mine. I looked up. I didn't sign anything. "You didn't need to," Griffin said, as if this were all very reasonable. "The property was in the family trust. That gives us executive control." "Grandpa told me he left the house to me," I said, trying to stay calm. "That it would be in my name." Vera gave me a look I'd known my whole life, somewhere between condescension and concern. "Verbal promises don't hold up in probate, dear. You know that." I stood there, folder heavy in my hands. My heartbeat was pounding so loud it muffled their voices, their movements. I wasn't even angry yet, just stunned. "You didn't think to mention any of this before you packed up my childhood and slapped someone else's name on the mailbox?" Silence. Zinea twirled her bracelet again. "We didn't think you'd take it so personally. It's just a house." "No," I said quietly. "It wasn't. It was a promise." No one spoke. Griffin looked away. Vera sat down, and Zinea's eyes dropped to her phone, thumbs scrolling like I wasn't even there. I left the room. The late afternoon sun had slid low, casting a golden hue across the back porch. I pushed open the patio door and stepped outside into the warm air. The honeysuckle Grandpa planted years ago still bloomed wild along the fence line, soft and fragrant like nothing had changed. I stood there, letting the heat soak into my skin, wondering how many decisions had been made without me while I was still standing. Graveside and heels too tight and eyes too red. Behind me, laughter broke out. Someone said something about dinner plans. The sound didn't fit. None of it did. Later, after they all left, Zinea tossing me a breezy, "See you tomorrow," like we were office coworkers, I collapsed into a kitchen chair and checked my phone. I shouldn't have. Zinea had posted a photo. Grandpa's porch. Captioned, "Some people care more about property than peace. Grandpa deserved better than drama." The comments were worse. "Let the dead rest." "Can't believe Maris is fighting over a house. Disgusting." There's always one. I stared at the screen, fingers frozen. They were already rewriting the narrative, painting me as the greedy, entitled one. And it was working. I stood, moved without thinking, straight to the study. The junk drawer still had the old screwdriver Grandpa kept for tiny projects and loose hinges. I grabbed it, knelt by the locked drawer, and began to pry it open. The wood splintered. My breath hitched. Inside, just one envelope. My name, in Grandpa's handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I just held it, my throat tight, my fingers trembling. "What have they done?" I whispered. Back at my apartment that night, I shut the door and leaned against it, still clutching the envelope. My purse slid to the floor. I didn't move. The silence was thick, like it had a heartbeat. I walked to the kitchen table and sat down slowly, like I'd aged a decade in a day. The envelope sat in front of me, untouched, like it had its own gravity. Finally, I opened it. Inside, two things. A folded copy of Grandpa's original will, and a yellowed sheet of notepaper. His handwriting again. "If they sold the house, check the signature and check the date. You weren't in town." I read it 3 times. Then I pulled out the sale agreement from the folder Vera had handed me earlier. There it was, my signature. Perfectly forged. Down to the slight tilt in the M and the little flourish at the end of the S. But I hadn't signed anything. Not for a sale, not for the house, not for a single damn thing. My mind started racing. I got up, pulled out my laptop, and searched my email. Typed, Seattle. I found it, the flight confirmation. Departure, May 11th, return, May 16th. The sale document was dated May 13th. I hadn't even been in Texas. I opened my digital calendar. 4 days packed with library symposium workshops, hotel bookings, panel sessions. I even found a photo of myself on stage, sent by a colleague. I leaned back slowly. Bitter air filled my lungs. Then I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a plastic file folder. I wrote across the front in thick black marker, "Truth." I slipped in the will, the flight confirmation, and a printed copy of the forged sale page. They hadn't just taken the house. They had erased me from the story and signed my name like I was already gone. It was nearly midnight when I picked up my phone and called Linda, a fellow librarian and friend who had helped organize the Seattle conference. She answered groggily, "Maris, everything okay?" "I'm so sorry to call this late," I said, voice cracking with exhaustion. "But could you do me a huge favor?" She hesitated for only a second. "Of course." "Could you send me a letter confirming I was in Seattle from May 11th to 16th, especially that I spoke at the symposium on the 13th? Her voice brightened instantly. "Oh, yeah, you crushed that talk. People were raving about it afterward. I'll email something first thing in the morning." "Thank you," I whispered, trying to keep the emotion out of my voice. "You have no idea how much that means." After we hung up, I plugged in my phone and walked into the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the fog of disbelief. And then I remembered. The old family iPad. Years ago, Vera had asked me to help her recover her Apple ID password. In the process, her messages and cloud backup had synced to all shared devices. I hadn't thought about it since. But now, I found it tucked in a hallway drawer, dusty but charged. I powered it on and tapped open the Messages app. It took only a few scrolls. A screenshot sent from Griffin to someone named Edward. "We've got her. Okay, don't worry. She won't contest. She's passive." My chest tightened. Farther down, a message from Vera to Griffin. "She's always been the silent one. That's why she's perfect." Perfect. Perfect to disappear. Perfect to ignore. Perfect to walk over. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, then took screenshots of everything and emailed them to myself. I also saved them onto a USB drive I kept in my desk, labeled the same as the folder. A truth. I held the drive tightly in my hand, the plastic cool and unassuming. They hadn't just lied. They counted on me being quiet, being agreeable, nodding and fading into the background while they rewrote the narrative and walked away clean. But they forgot something. I looked around my small apartment. It was quiet. But I wasn't weak. I grabbed Grandpa's will, slipped it into my bag, pocketed the USB. Then I grabbed my car keys. "You picked the wrong silent one," I whispered to no one. Sleep never came. Instead, I sat in my car outside my building, the sky just starting to lighten. The USB was still in my pocket, the will on the passenger seat. At 7:30 a.m., I pulled away from the curb and headed into downtown. The city was starting to wake up, people with coffee cups, dogs on leashes, earbuds in, all of them unaware of the tectonic shift happening inside me. At 8 o'clock sharp, I stood in front of a modest beige building with brass letters on the door, Martinez and Wyatt, Estate and Family Law. I walked in without an appointment. The receptionist looked startled when I said, "It's urgent. I need help." 15 minutes later, a woman stepped into the lobby. Late 40s, elegant but no nonsense, hair pulled into a smooth bun, a gray suit that said she didn't lose arguments. "You're Maris?" she asked, extending a hand. "Yes." "I'm Skylar Martinez. Let's talk." Her office smelled faintly of lemon polish and aged paper. She gestured for me to sit, and I pulled the truth folder from my bag. I laid everything out in front of her: the will, the fake sale document, the flight confirmations, the text screenshots. She didn't say much at first, just flipped through page by page, eyes narrowing slightly. Then she picked up the will, held it up to the light, smiled. "Your grandfather," she said, tapping a specific line with her pen, "was very careful." She turned the document toward me and pointed. "There's a clause here that overrides the trust. It explicitly states, the house may not be sold under any trust, delegation, or power of attorney unless Maris Blythe signs in person and in the presence of 2 witnesses. I blinked. "Wait, so they can't sell it?" "Not legally," she confirmed. "And forging your signature? That's fraud. Criminal fraud." Something shifted inside me. A floor I didn't even know had collapsed began to lock back into place. Skylar straightened in her chair. "I'm filing an emergency injunction to halt the transaction immediately. The buyer will be notified today. We'll also be submitting preliminary fraud claims." I let out a slow, shuddering breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Does that mean I'll have to go to court?" "Eventually, yes," she said gently. "But right now we're buying time. We're stopping the bleeding." She stood and walked to her printer, assembling documents with calm efficiency. For the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could win this. That evening, I drove past Grandpa's house. It was quiet, no cars, no chatter. The porch light was off, the windows drawn. I parked in the driveway, stepped out slowly. The gravel crunched under my shoes. I climbed the porch steps and reached under the flower pot. The spare key was still there, tucked beneath a dusty ceramic saucer. I let myself in. The house smelled like dust and stale citrus cleaner, like endings. I walked to the hallway. The old photo of Grandpa, me, and Lucky was still there, framed near the dining room. But this time I noticed something different. The back of the frame was thicker than I remembered. I turned it over. 4 tiny screws, hidden almost flush with the wood. In the kitchen, I found the same little screwdriver Grandpa used to keep in the junk tray. Brought it back, unscrewed the backing. Inside, taped neatly behind the photo, was a small, tarnished brass key, warm in my palm, like it had been waiting for me. I scanned the room. The fireplace. I stepped toward it, eyes combing the floor. Then I saw it, a small heart etched into one of the old floorboards near the hearth, faint but unmistakable. I knelt down, pried the board open with my fingers trembling. It gave way with a soft creak. Beneath it, a small fireproof lockbox sat nestled in the dark. I pulled it out and set it in my lap, slid the brass key into the lock. Click. The lid opened. Inside, a USB, a folded letter with my name on it, and an envelope labeled in Grandpa's handwriting.
And Ellis.
I stared at the envelope. "If they try to erase you, go to Ellis." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Maybe both. Ellis Granger. I hadn't heard his name in years, but the second I read it, I could see his face clear as day. Thin-rimmed glasses, soft eyes, always in that worn corduroy jacket that smelled like pipe smoke and peppermint. He lived just 2 blocks over and used to come by every weekend to play cards with Grandpa. Said he remembered everything the rest of the neighborhood forgot. Birthdays, old garage codes, what year the willow tree stopped blooming. I tucked the USB and the letter into my purse and held the envelope labeled Ellis in my lap for a moment before placing it gently alongside the rest. By 9 o'clock a.m., I was standing on his porch. It looked smaller than I remembered. The paint had peeled, and the railing leaned slightly left, but the wind chime, made of mismatched spoons, still danced in the breeze. I used to think it sounded like old laughter. I raised my hand to knock, but before I could touch the door, it swung open. "Maris Blythe," he said, voice creaking like the hinges. "I wondered when you'd come." He looked older, his frame thinner, hair grayer, but his eyes were still sharp, the way they always were when he caught someone bluffing in poker. "Come in," he said warmly. "Been waiting on you." The inside of his home smelled like old coffee, lavender, and books that hadn't been moved in years. He shuffled toward the kitchen table, motioning for me to sit. "I've got something for you," he said, opening a drawer beneath the table. Your grandfather gave it to me last fall, told me not to hand it over unless you asked. He set down a flash drive next to a cassette tape already waiting on the table, and beside it, a photo, one I hadn't seen in years. It was the three of us, me, Grandpa, and Lucky, under the willow tree in the backyard. I was missing one front tooth and grinning like I'd just discovered buried treasure. On the back, in Grandpa's handwriting, "She remembers what matters." My throat tightened. I reached out and touched the photo gently. "Why'd he give this all to you?" I asked, voice shaky. Ellis rested his palm over the cassette. "Because he didn't trust them. And he said you were the only one who'd fight for what the house meant, not just what it was worth." He opened a small cassette-to-digital converter, clicked in the tape, and hit play. Static buzzed, then Grandpa's voice filled the room, rougher, older, but unmistakably him. "They'll tear it apart, Ellis, piece by piece. If I don't lock it down..." Ellis's own voice followed, faint and muffled. "You've written the will." "It's not about paperwork," Grandpa replied. "It's about intention. Maris understands that. She always did." I stared down at my hands. "She won't fight for herself," Grandpa's voice continued, "but she'll fight for the meaning. That's why she's the keeper of the flame." A knot swelled in my chest. I pressed my fingers to my lips, trying not to cry outright. All these years I thought my silence was weakness. But he had seen it differently. Not loud but steady. Not flashy but rooted. He had seen me. Really seen me. "Why didn't he tell me this?" I whispered. Ellis gave me a soft smile. "He did. You just needed to be ready to hear it." We sat for a while longer. He made tea. We talked about Grandpa's laugh, the time we almost burned down the garage building a treehouse, and how Lucky used to bark at the wind like it owed him money. For the first time in days, something in my chest felt lighter. Not healed, but not hollow either. As I was getting ready to leave, Ellis handed me the Polaroid from the table. "Take it," he said. "Your fight's not over, but you've got more fire now." I held the photo close to my chest. Back home that evening, I spread everything out on my kitchen table again. Grandpa's will, the flight documents, the forged sale agreement, the screenshots, and now, his voice. I pulled out the affidavit Skylar had given me. I stared at the blank signature line for a long time. I thought about Grandpa's voice, about that photo, about the tree and the stories layered in every inch of that house. And I signed. Not out of vengeance, not even out of desperation, but because something sacred had been placed in my hands. And if I let them bury it under forged papers and rehearsed lies, it wouldn't just be the house that was lost. It would be everything it stood for. The next morning, I didn't bother with makeup. I dressed clean and simple, packed every document into a secure binder, and drove downtown. Skylar had arranged a meeting for 9:30 at the headquarters of Sterling Properties, the real estate firm managing the transaction. I arrived 10 minutes early. Skylar was already there, standing just inside the glass doors, calm as ever, like a mountain in a charcoal blazer. "Let's begin," she said, and held the door open. Inside, the air was too cold, too sterile. Lavender-scented air freshener did little to hide the staleness of ambition and shortcuts. A young receptionist blinked at us. "Do you have an appointment?" "She does now," Skylar said smoothly, sliding a thick envelope onto the counter. "Cease and desist. Kindly ask Mr. Edward Jackson and your managing broker to join us." The receptionist hesitated, eyes wide, but vanished quickly. 10 minutes later, Edward Jackson appeared. Mid-40s, expensive haircut, confident swagger that dipped just slightly when he saw the envelope in Skylar's hand. "Ms. Martinez," he said coolly. "Representing?" "Maris Blythe," she replied, "the rightful heir to the property your firm attempted to sell using fraudulent authorization." He blinked. "I was told her mother was the point of contact." "You were told lies," Skylar said, already opening the file. "This," she tapped the affidavit, "is a sworn statement with evidence that my client was not even in the state when the documents were signed." Then she held up the forged sale agreement. "And this contains a signature she never made." Edward turned to me, his expression softening. A little patronizing, a little guilty. "Your mother told us you were emotional. I should have verified more. I didn't say a word. Sometimes silence speaks louder." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm withdrawing my offer immediately, and I'll be speaking with legal about the reputational damage." Skylar gave a tight nod. "I recommend you also notify your title company. They nearly became accomplices to a felony." As we stepped outside, Skylar's eyes flicked toward the receptionist's desk. Zenaya's name was on the outgoing text screen. I recognized the contact photo. Skylar gave me a small, satisfied smile. That was the easy part. By the time I returned to Grandpa's house that afternoon, the driveway was full again. Vera's silver sedan was parked diagonally across the sidewalk like usual, disregard disguised as dominance. Zenaya's white Range Rover gleamed in the sun, back hatch open, cardboard boxes spilling onto the lawn like someone had hit fast forward on the moving process. Inside, the air was once again heavy with lemon cleaner and disruption. Boxes lined the hallway now. Labels written in Vera's loopy script read, Estate, Review, To Auction, Donations. I found them in the living room, cataloging everything, as Vera put it. She was wearing white gloves, pearlescent, like she was handling museum pieces, not Grandpa's ashtray collection. In her hands was a wooden pipe case, turning it over like it might whisper secrets. We're just documenting what needs to be relocated, she said, not looking up. You mean stolen? I snapped, stepping into the room. Zenaya gave a little laugh, soft and venomous. That's rich coming from you. Suddenly you care about these dusty old things? I stepped closer, eyes locked on hers. They're not things. They're stories. And you're not touching another one. Vera lowered the pipe box slowly. Maris, let's not make this hostile. Your grandfather belonged to all of us. No, I said, voice steady. You made it hostile when you forged my name and called it convenience. Her jaw twitched, but I was already turning away. And that's when I saw it. Near the door, propped against the wall, one of Grandpa's paintings. A sweeping landscape of the Colorado mountains we'd hiked together when I was 15, only something wasn't right. The colors were too saturated, too glossy, too wrong. I knelt beside it and ran my fingers along the edge. Not linen, synthetic. Please don't start playing curator, Zenaya scoffed behind me. I ignored her and pulled out my phone. I need a favor, I told Skylar. Bring someone who knows art, now. Less than an hour later, Skylar arrived with a woman named Ms. Levin, a retired museum registrar with sharp eyes and a quiet authority that filled the room. She examined the piece in silence for several minutes, then said, This is a reproduction, a very good one, but it's not the original. Vera's voice was sharp. That's ridiculous. That painting's been in our family for decades. Skylar raised an eyebrow. And yet, here we are. I felt a chill spread through my chest. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It never was. They weren't just selling property. They were laundering what was inside it, replacing originals, gutted memories, converting Grandpa's life into liquidatable assets, and calling it closure. I turned and walked down the hall, past the study, toward the attic hatch in the hallway ceiling. I hadn't been up there since high school, but I had a hunch. I reached up and pulled the rope ladder down. Dust rained from the ceiling as it creaked into place. The air grew heavier as I climbed, musty, still, the kind of air that knew secrets. The hallway light barely reached this far, but I didn't need much. In the corner, behind the old chimney, I saw it. A square shape, metallic, tucked behind a loose wooden panel. I crawled across the beams and tugged the box free. A brushed steel safe. No keyhole, just a keypad. I stared at it. Birthdays? I tried Grandpa's. No. Mine? Wrong. Then it came to me, one afternoon years ago, helping him set up his email. He'd smiled and said, Let's keep it simple. How about Lai's adoption date? Lai, our dog after Lucky passed. We rescued her from a shelter on April 17th. I typed in 0417. Click. The lock gave. The lid creaked open. Inside was a bundle of aged documents, carefully wrapped in parchment and wax paper, and a flash drive. I lifted the documents out, heart hammering. Each one was stamped with verified appraisals, ownership certificates, insurance paperwork. These weren't just family heirlooms. They were museum-grade works of art, historically significant. I recognized them all, paintings and artifacts that had lined Grandpa's study and living room walls my whole life. And now I had proof they were real, and that someone, probably Vera, had planned to swap them for reproductions. Tucked at the bottom was a note, Grandpa's handwriting, unmistakable. If they get desperate, they'll trade history for cash. Don't let them. These pieces were collected with meaning, not money. You're the only one who saw that. I sat back against the wall, the safe still open, holding the note like a tether. A vibration in my pocket snapped me back. It was Skylar. She filed a counterclaim, she said calmly. Your mother is alleging mental instability, falsified documentation, and undue influence. I closed my eyes. Of course. The classic move. If you can't win, discredit. She's requesting a freeze on all proceedings. Let her, I said, voice low. I've got the truth. After carefully resecuring the safe, I climbed down from the attic, heart still pounding. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low and cast long golden beams across the backyard, I went to sit under the old willow tree. Its trunk still leaned slightly to the left, just like it always had. It felt like it was listening. That's when I heard footsteps. Zinaya. Barefoot in a designer jumpsuit, arms folded like this was her backyard yoga retreat. "You never fought for any of this," she said. "Why now?" I didn't look at her, just kept my eyes on the sky through the leaves. "Because Grandpa fought for me," I said quietly, even when I didn't think I deserved it. She scoffed. "You're not special, Maris. You just happened to be first in line this time." I turned to her. "No, I'm the only one who read the fine print." Her mouth twitched. She turned to go, but then paused. "You think this ends with the house?" "No," I said. "That's why I'm still here." Evening came. I was back inside, sifting through legal folders on the dining room table, when I heard the engine outside. I moved to the window. A moving van, and behind it Vera's SUV. She wasn't alone. Two men in dark suits stepped out beside her, each holding briefcases. They weren't here to talk. They were here to take. I stepped back slowly from the window, heart thudding, breath low and steady. "They're making their final move," I whispered to myself. But so was I. I didn't panic. I didn't run. I walked calmly to the dining room table, picked up my phone, and tapped the voice memo app. Then I pressed record and set it down, face first, the microphone angled perfectly toward the room. I stood there waiting. The front door burst open without so much as a knock. Vera entered first, sharp heels echoing on the hardwood like a gavel. Behind her, two estate lawyers in tailored suits flanked her like bodyguards from a courtroom drama. They didn't smile, didn't blink, just followed her in like they'd already won. She didn't look at me. She walked straight to the table and dropped a thick folder with a flat slap. "This house was never just about you," she said coldly. I didn't move. I reached into the drawer beside me and slowly pulled out my own folder, thicker, heavier. I laid it out on the table with quiet precision. Appraisals, certificates, the authentication for the real artwork, and Grandpa's will. "No," I said. "It was about the $2 million you were laundering through his art." One of the lawyers shifted in his seat. The other froze mid-page. Vera's eyes narrowed, but before she could speak, the front door opened again. This time by invitation. Edward Jackson stepped inside, looking far less confident than the last time we'd met. And behind him, Skylar. Composed, calm, lethal. Her briefcase clicked softly as she set it on the table and took a seat across from me. Edward looked around, the tension finally settling on his shoulders. "I wasn't told this would be a group session." "We thought it best you heard all sides," Skylar replied evenly. I rose, walked over to the entertainment console, and pulled out the USB from my pocket, slid it into the old laptop Grandpa used to write letters on. The screen flickered, then came to life. Grandpa's face appeared, older, a little thinner, but his eyes were bright. Alive. His voice rasped through the room. "If you're watching this, they did exactly what I feared. But I left the truth in the walls. I left it for Maris, because she's the only one who listened." No one moved. Even the attorneys were silent. Edward cleared his throat. "Your mother said you were unstable, that you hated this place." I turned to him, voice level, steady. "She said that because I never told her what she wanted to hear. I didn't want to sell it. I didn't want to erase him. That's the difference between us." Vera stood abruptly. "Oh, please," she snapped. "Are we really giving weight to a sentimental home movie? He was old. He said dramatic things all the time." Skylar raised a brow and opened her own folder. "Then perhaps you'd rather we focus on these." She held up copies of the forged signature pages, the insurance reports, and the emails detailing the art swap. But Vera wasn't done. She smirked and tapped on her iPad. "How about this?" She turned the screen toward Edward. A video played from a family barbecue years ago. Me, in a blue sundress, holding lemonade and laughing. "I wish I could just walk away from this house," I said. Vera paused the video. "Case closed." Skylar didn't even blink. "Play the full clip," she said. Edward handed her the tablet. She rewound the footage and pressed play again. There I was, still laughing. Then my tone shifted, quieter. But I promised him I wouldn't, not after everything he built here. Silence fell again, this time heavier. I stepped forward and looked directly at Edward. "They thought I'd stay silent, but silence isn't weakness, it's strategy." I handed him a neatly organized folder. Timelines, proof, documents, Grandpa's final video, Ellis's testimony, the flight confirmations, the art evaluations, everything. Everything they weren't told. Edward flipped through the pages. His face changed. He turned to Vera. I won't be part of this anymore. You've crossed every line. Vera's face contorted in disbelief. We gave you life, she hissed. I stared at her, calm as ever. And you tried to sell it back to me. At that moment, the unmistakable flash of blue and red lights pierced through the front windows. The room froze. Skylar stood, calmly gathering her briefcase. She looked at Vera and said quietly, They're not here for me. And then the knock came. 2 officers stepped through the door, badges flashing, voices firm. Vera Langford? Griffin Blythe? You're under investigation for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit estate theft. Vera started shouting. It's a mistake. She's manipulating you. They cut her off with a crisp, rehearsed command. Griffin didn't fight. He looked tired, smaller, like he'd been carrying the weight of his own lies too long. As they were let out, I stood still, unmoving. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The truth spoke louder than anything I could have screamed. 3 weeks passed. Long enough for the dust to settle, not long enough for the ache to fade. The house was quiet again. Not empty, quiet, in the way you only understand after chaos has been cleared out. The front door still creaked the same. The air still smelled like cedar and old books. But this time, I could walk from room to room without bracing for battle. The house was mine now, legally. But I never wanted to just keep it. I walked the hallway slowly that morning, stopping at each room, not to mourn, not to gloat, but to imagine, to plan. The boxes now lining the walls weren't for packing. They were for rebuilding. One bedroom would become a reading room for seniors who needed community. Another, an art space for kids whose families couldn't afford summer camp. In the backyard, Grandpa's old shed would become a workshop for community classes. Not a shrine, not a museum. A place to keep the flame alive. Just like he wanted. Ellis visited that afternoon. He shuffled in slower than the last time, but his eyes lit up when he saw what I'd hung in the hallway, beneath the stained glass window. The Polaroid. Grandpa, me, and Lucky. All of us beaming. Ellis reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small plaque. Handwritten, carved carefully. She remembers what matters. I didn't trust myself to speak. I just nodded. He squeezed my hand. He knew. Later that afternoon, I returned to Grandpa's study. The one room I hadn't touched since the legal storm had passed. The air in there was thicker than the rest of the house, steeped in old paper and pine and something like memory. His pipe still sat on the windowsill, untouched. Books leaned against one another in quiet, slanted towers. It was like he'd just stepped out for a walk. I approached the old oak desk slowly, running my fingers along its worn edge, and opened the final drawer I hadn't dared touch. Inside, wrapped in a faded red napkin, was a leather-bound notebook. Grandpa's. I opened it. The handwriting danced across the page in his signature looping scrawl. Some pages were recipes. Others were bits of gardening advice, notes to himself. A few scribbled lines of old hymns. And at the very end, a final entry. Dated just 3 days before he passed. Redemption is heavier than revenge, but more lasting. You remembered, Maris. You kept the house alive. I closed the book slowly, my hands resting on the cover, the words echoing through me like church bells. Outside, the sun was casting gold through the trees. I could hear the creak of the willow in the breeze, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't brace against the sound. The house groaned a little, its bones stretching like an old friend waking up from sleep. I sank into Grandpa's old armchair by the window, the one where he'd nap with Lucky curled up at his feet. The upholstery was rough but familiar, like the embrace of someone who's always known you. And finally, my body let go of all the tension it had carried for months, maybe years. They had tried to erase me, to write me out of the story, but the house remembered. And so did I. The next morning, I took the old notebook and placed it gently on a shelf in the study. Not hidden, not framed, just resting, like it belonged. Down the hall, I passed the room that had once been mine. It still smelled faintly like lemon and lavender, but the bedsheets were fresh now, the closet open, the light soft. I had a vision for that space too, a quiet room where people could come when they needed silence, a soft landing, a reminder that some things, once broken, can still be repaired. Later that week, I stood outside the front gate with Skylar as we watched a contractor pull up in a white van. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked, sipping from a paper coffee cup. I nodded. This place isn't going back into a vault. It's going to breathe again. She smiled. Your grandfather would be proud. I think he already was. I watched the workers unload supplies, paint, lumber, new signage for the community initiative I was launching. The Blythe House Project. It had a nice ring to it. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, from Edward Jackson. It was short, almost businesslike, but sincere. I believed the wrong people. I regret that more than I can say. If you ever need someone in real estate who tells the truth, call me. No strings. Respectfully, Edward. I placed it in the drawer with the others. Proof not all endings are clean, but some come with accountability. Vera and Griffin had both been charged. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit estate theft. The legal term sounded clinical, dry. But the effects were real. They hadn't just lost the house, they lost the mask, the image, the myth of being the well-meaning family just trying to help. Zanaya avoided trial by flipping early, testified, took a deal. She left town without even packing her things. I didn't stop her. Letting her go wasn't forgiveness, it was clarity. Some people don't deserve front row seats to your healing. I kept building. The reading room was finished first. Light poured through the old windows as seniors from the local retirement center gathered each Tuesday. Some brought their own books. Others just came to sit and listen. One man, Harold, wore the same vest every time and liked to pretend he was reading but actually just napped in the corner. I never corrected him. The art room was next. Paper, clay, paint, none of it fancy. Just enough to give kids a place to make messes and meaning. Laughter replaced the silence that had haunted those walls for months. And Grandpa's shed? That became a community workshop, hosting everything from woodworking classes to basic car repair sessions. People stopped calling it Maris's inheritance. They started calling it what it really was. A second chance, for the house, for the neighborhood, for me. One afternoon, I found myself standing alone at the front window, watching the wind play with the honeysuckle vines. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Ellis. Stopped by, saw the new porch sign. You're doing good, kid. E. I smiled. Outside, the porch now bore a new nameplate, not a family surname, but a phrase Grandpa once whispered while he watered the plants. This house has good bones. So does she. I took a photo of the plate, sent it to Ellis, then slid my phone into my pocket. The kitchen clock ticked gently behind me. The floor beneath my feet didn't groan like it used to, but it still sang, quietly, like it remembered how to hold weight. I had been erased, forgotten, written off. But in the end, I hadn't just reclaimed a house. I'd reclaimed the truth. The day I opened the house to the public was warm and golden, the way spring can feel like a quiet apology for winter. Neighbors wandered in through the front gate with tentative steps and open expressions. Children tugged their parents toward the art room. A few older folks ran their fingers along the hall walls like they were greeting an old friend. I stood in the foyer, heart thudding, watching it all unfold. No speeches, no fanfare, just the doors open and the house breathing again. At some point, I slipped away to the study, needing a minute. The room hadn't changed. I hadn't let it. Grandpa's desk, his books, his old pipe still resting where it always had. I sat down slowly in his chair and looked at the photo Ellis had hung on the wall just above the window. The Polaroid. The one of me, Grandpa, and Lucky, under the willow tree. Beneath it, the plaque still read, "She remembers what matters." I reached into the drawer and pulled out the leather notebook one more time. Not to read it, just to hold it, to feel its weight in my hands, and remember that I had carried something through, something sacred, something almost lost. The thing about houses is, they don't just hold people, they hold echoes. I heard Grandpa's laughter in the creak of the stairs. I heard his steadiness in the tick of the hallway clock. I heard his faith in me, loudest of all, in the silence he left behind. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the county clerk's office, an official one. It confirmed what Schuyler had already told me, but seeing it in ink felt different. The house was mine, entirely, irrevocably. No one could contest it now. I placed the letter inside the truth folder and filed it away. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. That folder was more than evidence. It was the story behind the story. I walked the perimeter of the house that evening, barefoot in the grass, the way I used to when I was a kid. The honeysuckle vines had grown wilder than usual, curling into the slats of the old fence like they were trying to remember something. Near the back, the willow tree swayed gently in the wind, and I sat beneath it. This was where Grandpa used to sit with a book in his lap and a mug of tea balanced on the armrest of a lawn chair. Sometimes he read. Sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he just looked out across the yard like he was counting blessings the rest of us couldn't see. I pulled my knees to my chest and rested my chin there, staring out like he used to. The quiet wasn't hollow anymore. It was full. Full of everything we fought for. Full of all the things that didn't make it into contracts or photographs but lived in the bones of the house. The smell of cinnamon toast in the morning, the creak of the attic door, the way the porch light flickered when a storm rolled in. They'd tried to erase me. They tried to tell the story without me. And for a while they did. But the thing about truth, it doesn't need permission to survive. It just needs someone to protect it. One night, I found myself standing at the very edge of the front porch, the stars bold and bright above me. I looked out at the neighborhood, at Ellis's house 2 blocks down, at the library lights flickering off in the distance. Everything was still, but not stagnant. Still like breath held in reverence. Still like peace after the last page is turned. Inside, the house hummed with life. Quiet footsteps in the hall, laughter drifting up from the reading room, art drying on the windowsills. I had turned a wound into a window, a betrayal into a beginning. And though it took every ounce of courage I had, I finally understood something Grandpa must have always known. This house wasn't just an inheritance. It was a promise, and he made to me, and one I chose to keep. Thank you for listening. If this story found you at the right time, I hope it reminds you of something important, that what they try to take from you doesn't define you. What you fight to protect, what you choose to build with your own 2 hands, that's who you are. And if you ever find yourself standing alone in an empty room full of echoes, wondering whether you matter, remember this: the house remembered me. And someday something will remember you too. Just wait and listen.